All right, well, good afternoon. Welcome to the May 12th, 2025 CAO Committee.
Chair Stone?
Here.
Councilmember Vinker? Here. Councilmember Burt? For the record, all present.
Thank you. And I will turn it over, I guess, to staff to start us off. I don't know who'd like to begin.
And Chair, for the record, for general public comment, we have no request to speak and no hands are raised for general.
Thank you. I was looking at the wrong agenda. Okay, now we'll go to our one and only action item, a discussion regarding council-appointed officers' annual performance evaluation process, review, and goal setting. Now I'll turn it over to staff.
Good afternoon, Chair Stone and council members. We're here again to launch the fiscal year 24-25 evaluation process for the council-appointed officers. Here with us today is Dan Rich. He's the consultant with the Municipal Resources Group who will facilitate the process with council.
Thank you, Sandra. Good afternoon, committee. Nice to see you all again. Hasn't been all that long. Really, it's up to you. There's a kind of draft outline of an agenda that I put together. Main goals I'm hoping to achieve from the day today is to get consensus on the timeline, the prompts you want the CAOs to use for the self-evaluations, and then the interview questions for you. Those are kind of the main things. There's a cover memo provided to you, which included eight suggestions or ideas I had to tweak the process based on the experience of last year. They are simply that. They are just suggestions. They're just my ideas. They're not based on anything else. So it's totally up to you. Hopefully you can have some dialogue amongst yourselves and with the CAOs to see what you want to do with those. I did also provide you with strikeout and new version of the prompts and the interview questions so you could see the suggested changes I'm making or I'm proposing. Those are relatively consistent with the ideas I had in terms of kind of tightening up the process a little bit and better aligning the self-evaluation prompts with the interview questions. I kind of, in hindsight, realized those weren't that well aligned last year. So I think that would make it smoother for everybody. But there are a few things that would be great to get direction from you on today, specifically in terms of one of the suggestions was to change the timeline for the interviews. I think the attached timeline does not change it at all. So it is as is. I think some of the CAOs may have some concerns if we tried to move it up too much because that impacts their timeline for doing the self-evaluations. The key objective here is really just not to have the process drag out too long. And so I think what we're hoping is as long as we can get all the interviews done by mid-August, we should be able to stay on track. The other main suggestion worthy of discussion is looking at the salary comps. You recall last year there's a very long list of agencies to be compared to, which seemed a little unwieldy and frankly unnecessary, in my opinion. Sandra has brought forward a proposal to align them with the same comps that you use for your other management employees. I think it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cities down from 17 or 18 that are in the current comp list. It's a pretty time-consuming process, frankly, to collect the data from all those different agencies, and I'm not sure the value of having all that many. And then the other thing that's worthy of some discussion, should you choose, is the suggestion I made so last year, generally, I had 39 pages of notes from you all last year to try to boil that down into a semi-cohesive consensus report is challenging. And generally, I'm looking for the overall themes and where there's consistency of view. I did not use a hard rubric of, 4 of the 7 had to have said something precisely to get it into the report. So whether or not you want a little bit more rigidity around that to kind of make sure the report truly reflects majority view, or potentially you could have, the majority view and then another section of, these are other things I heard. I will say last year, even though I tried to capture the major themes and ideas when we went into closed session without revealing details, there were comments made around, well, but you didn't include this or you didn't include that. So, you all need to decide kind of how much you want in that final report. Those are the main things. Again, then ultimately we want to settle on the timeline and the questions for the self-evaluations and the questions that I would be asking you all in interviews. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions and have your dialogue.
Great, thank you. Well, before we do our discussion, we can open it up for public comment on item 1. Are there any commenters?
Yes, we have one request to speak.
Okay, do 3 minutes.
Our first speaker is Herb B.
Chair Stone and committee members, and just review the item that I sent to you by email late yesterday. Under your process, you've had each council appointed officer with the council set goals, which I noticed in question also uses the word priorities, and performance measures, key performance indicators. The public has an opportunity to speak to you, when you bring in amendment to the employment contracts and when you do evaluations, and including speaking to you prior to closed sessions on those items. And it seems to me that both of those things, the goals or priorities, whatever they're called, and the key performance indicators are identifiable public records that are not exempt from disclosure. And when you bring in new employment amendments for the new year, you would have what those are for the prior fiscal year identified, and the public could speak about them. And when you do evaluations, before you go into closed sessions to discuss that subject, the public's given an opportunity to speak, and they could speak the same on those as well. And they could indicate, how they believe those goals are being met based on the key performance indicators, or it may indicate that there should be other measures used or other goals used. But in the absence of those items being public, the public just essentially gets up and speaks about whatever they want to speak about. It may have nothing to do with how you're evaluating council appointed officers. I also believe this method of having individual meetings with Mr. Rich doesn't fall within the exception of a meeting, and those what is a meeting under the Brown Act applies to closed session meetings as well as to open session, and therefore I don't believe it's an appropriate process, as I indicated in my letter. Thank you.
And that concludes public comment on item 1.
All right, thank you. We'll return back to the dais. Let's follow the order in the draft agenda that Mr. Rich sent, and start with whether there's any issues with the interview timeline before we move on to salary compensation, at least the benchmark agencies. So any thoughts on the timeline? Councilmember?
Yeah, well, first I just want to make sure we have an opportunity to speak on things that aren't listed as the possible changes, just more broadly.
Yeah, I think maybe next steps, we could just wrap all that into that.
So I think it was noted that an intention to try to have the interviews of the council members before summer break, but then when I looked at the attachment that has the timeline, it shows from July 28th to August 8th. which would be after summer break, which I think is probably more appropriate, given that we get all jammed up with budget and a lot of stuff that we try and put through before the summer break.
Yeah, that's right. I didn't change the dates from last year's in the kind of detailed timeline. The bullet saying to do the interviews before the summer break was my dream team personal aspirational goal. But again, I think for the CAOs, frankly, that's a little challenging because of finishing the fiscal year and then doing well, they can speak for themselves, but I've heard that might be challenging to have them too early. And as you indicated, the council's got a lot going on. So, just an idea to throw out there.
Okay.
It's entirely up to you how you want to do it.
Okay, that's all I had on that. Well, just other than the September dates look pretty compressed. And I know that last year, the process stretched longer than we all had wanted, but I'm skeptical about compressing all those September dates in. So and this is tentative like it was last year. So if it doesn't work, then we adjust, right?
Yeah, and the challenge, one of the challenges we faced last year was I think we had to postpone one, if not two, closed sessions because the regular meeting agendas were so long. So part of that will be kind of on the city clerk and the city manager in terms of agenda planning. The alternative, although not generally popular with council members, is to have these on a different day or night so that they can have their own timeline and not be dependent on the council meeting that night.
And I'll say that last year, we really increased the process work because not only was it the first year you were with us, but that we were looking to improve and change the process some. And so that resulted in some iterations. So I think that inherently it should be a little more streamlined this year. So maybe we'll hit.
Yeah, the other where I did tighten it a little bit is last year, kind of the beginning of the process got a little drawn out. We started a little later and we had multiple meetings just because there was a lot of new stuff going on. So I'm hoping and assuming that will be tighter this year.
Okay, thanks.
Vice Mayor, do you have any thoughts?
Just a couple minor ones. One is looking at the July 28th to August 8th window for you to speak with us. I'm wondering if that, it may get pushed out due to our schedules, but I think we might need to anticipate that it will. We're still on council break at the front part of that. I know I personally will not be in the state at the first part of that. And you have a bit of a window between, I know you had 39 pages of notes last year to compile, but you will have a window between that and the next step. And so I'm just thinking that may be a little, may need to go a little later. And then I'm just trying to recollect, and I don't know if this is contemplated to be the same. I think you said it was, but we're going to have an opportunity after the self-evaluations to, meet in closed session with the CAOs. But do you do anything not written with them to make sure that, things are communicated to us in a way that, having been through it once with us before, might be most helpful? In other words, it looks like it's just a lot of paperwork on your side and until after we meet with the CAOs. Is that right?
Yeah, for the most part. I do communicate with them via email or in person as they wish, more just to make sure they're aware of the process and the timeline and things are flowing, or if they have questions about something, but not in tons of detail.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I guess I'm just thinking that I mean, they know us pretty well. They've been around, but you also have heard us deliberate. And to the extent there might be more content that would be helpful to us, or different content that might be helpful to us to just streamline the process. I was just wondering if there's any kind of feedback loop, or we just get it raw.
Well, I think, one of the keys today is to make sure the prompts that we have them do their self-evaluations on are what you want them to be on. So they're giving you what you want and need, to do your evaluations. And then again, to better tie that with the questions I ask you so they match up. The other component that didn't really talk about is, last year you asked for, kind of came up during the process, was KPIs for them. And so we want to make sure we build that in at the beginning, assuming that is still an interest of the council this year. And so again, and what we prompt them, it's going to have to be a little bit more iterative at the tail end of the process, because if they suggest, in their self-report what their goals and KPIs are, but what comes out of your process is we want their goals to be here, not here, then obviously there's going to have to be some back and forth and me kind of facilitating that. But I think it's important for them to be thinking about it in advance, and for you all to be thinking about it as part of the interview process, so that hopefully that all comes together.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with my colleagues on the interview timeline. Don't have a problem with what's been proposed. I generally kind of like the timeline of it being after our summer recess. That seems to be when our agendas are the lightest for the year, and having the check-ins individually with council members, I've appreciated being at the end of the break, because I kind of feel like that's when I myself have had time to be able to just reflect on the year a little more. It's kind of less just playing constant catch up. And so I think that's been valuable, at least for me. So I have no issues with the timeline.
Maybe the city clerk, can you remind me when the summer break is this year?
June 18th to August, one moment. It's the first week of August, but let me confirm.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, basically, I think we could probably, hopefully we could get you, some of you that are around during the break, we can get them started. Those of you that aren't around during the break, we could get you in that last week. Frankly, the key is locking in some times, in advance. So you have it on your calendar, I have it on my calendar. But if we have to slip, a few days after the 8th, I think we'll be okay. But it does take some time to pull it all together before I send it back out to you.
I think on my calendar, it says August 4th. Is that it?
Yep, and just was going to confirm August 4th is the first council meeting and when council returns from their break. So it's June 20th to August 3rd.
So I can look at the calendar and tweak it, but maybe, if we can push that out, 4 or 5 days further, give a little bit more flexibility. But I would encourage those that are in town to take advantage of the early interview slots.
Great, thank you. All right, let's talk about the salary comps. Go ahead.
So generally, I like the direction we've gone. When I looked at the other local market ones, there were two that kind of stood out as potentially being valuable: Berkeley and San Mateo. I'm trying to recall when we've used those two reference points, but they have, I think, a lot of similarities to Palo Alto in terms of both size and scope of services. They're not, remember what utilities Berkeley has, limited. Yeah. Nevertheless, those might be the two that I would add. And last year, did we have this entire list? Okay, so if we add back 2 more, it's not a big thing. Huh? That's all I had.
Yeah,
Dan,
just,
yeah, go ahead.
just to comment on those, whatever you all, there, something about college towns that is unique, so there's some value in that. Just by way of comparison, though, Berkeley is 125,000 population and San Mateo is 108. So both a little bigger, but you have other bigger cities on your list already. Sunnyvale, Santa Clara, San Jose, obviously. Mountain View's a little bit bigger as well. Fremont's bigger. So you have, several larger cities.
Well, and when we kind of look at comparisons, we look at both our resident population and then our worker population at some convergence of those two factors. And because we have such a high worker population, that it makes some of those other cities more comparable.
And to this point, a few of our other employee groups have Berkeley and San Mateo in their comparison benchmark studies.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
That's right.
So is there like a limit on the number, or just that it's a lot more effort the more we add? So there's not.
There's no science to it other than it is a lot more effort and there's more chances of error if you don't,
Sure.
get everything right, and the value added of it.
Right,
Yeah.
but if we add Berkeley, we don't have to swap out something
No,
necessarily. That's
no.
okay. 'Cause I concur with the Berkeley, just sort of the unique town gown aspect. I just think it's helpful to have that in the mix. I would also suggest we look at Mountain View because they're also in our county and have some of the same, count.
It was just double counted or something.
Oh, they're on the right, so they're not, okay. Well, then good. Okay. All right, that's all I have.
I'm fine with adding Berkeley and San Mateo. All right,
Very good.
great. Let's keep this up. Move on to the bar to make the written report. And so just for clarity, so right now, your own process is you just try to kind of gauge where the council is in these closed session discussions and you just weigh what you think the
Well,
majority is
This
aligned
is,
on?
no, this is all before the closed session. So this is the report, based on your interviews, that then gets written up and sent back to you. So it's more, I'm looking more at themes versus, checking the box that four people say that, because it's hard to, you all answer the same questions, but you answer them differently. Sometimes more directly, sometimes less directly. And, so I can't just check a box always and say, but if there's kind of a common theme is how I did it last year. So the question here is, can it be a little bit more rigorous that, really four of you do have to say it to make the consensus report? Again, no magic to it. I think what's come up last year and based on your conversation last year and previous years is, several of you felt something similar, but maybe didn't say it exactly the same, so it didn't get into the report. So, I don't have strong feelings on this. It's just, the concept though is that the report should be the consensus, the majority view of the council, not, with all due respect, all seven of you have your own opinions and there's usually one or two things each of you have of concern or, or strengths or whatnot. And so, how do we ensure what's being put in writing really reflects the majority view? We also, the flip side of that is we have the first closed session where you have the report in hand and you can discuss it and say, no, this is really, missing. And you can all then be in the same room and say, yeah, I agree it's missing. Or you can say, no, that doesn't need to be in there. So it worked okay. It's just a question of if you want to tighten it up a little bit.
So you're not making a recommendation that it be changed?
No, it's entirely up to you. It would be easier for me to know that there's four or more people on each thing, but the reality for me is it's not always that easy to ascertain that. I think maybe a compromise would be to kind of have that as the goal and look for it. But there's a little bit of subjectivity involved that, Councilmember Burt says it this way, Vice Mayor Vinker says it this way, but I think they're both getting at the same thing. Therefore, it gets in there. But if, Councilmember Burt and Councilmember Stone are the only two that say anything about it, it's not going to get in there. Is that?
Yeah. No, thanks for that.
So it's a little bit more nuanced and subjective, but with the goal of trying to be a little bit tighter on getting majority views.
Okay. Appreciate it. Any thoughts or questions?
Yeah, I'm just reflecting on kind of the ebbs and flows of this approach over the years, and just a few different thoughts. So there are times where we have a majority who may speak up on an issue, which doesn't mean the balance weren't concurring. So we need to, if you are unclear whether there's a concurrence on a theme, then I think we need to solicit that as opposed to count on people speaking up to it, because some council members will just kind of assume, oh, I agreed with that colleague, but I didn't say anything. And next thing you know, it gets interpreted as not a concurrence. I do think it is important that where there is a majority support for a point of view that stands out. And then there are always, as you say, anywhere from minority opinions to outliers. And I think the outlier opinion really probably doesn't belong in the report if it's a single council member. But if it's 2 or 3 council members who have a point of view, but it's not held by the majority, then I think that warrants at least a mention as a point of view. So that's where I draw the line. If it's a single council member that has an outlier perspective, I don't think that's there. But whether we say it's 2 or 3 that hold a minority perspective, that gets noted as a minority perspective.
Yeah, and that's helpful. You will recall, or you may recall that last year, there were many phrases that the majority felt this, but one council member, sometimes I would even point out one if it was a, really strongly held opinion. But I think I would tend to agree with you to make the report. There probably should be 2 or 3 that kind of share it. So that might be the flip side of kind of this nuancing of it.
Yeah, I agree. But I did like how last year there would be the occasional mention of that single member, because there could be an experience that a council member experiences with a CAO that was so egregious or so incredible that deserves a call out for the rest of us to be aware of. So I wouldn't want to create such a rigid format that would no longer be able to make that report. So I agree with what Councilmember Burt was saying.
Well, and if I might add that if the intent is to make sure that colleagues are aware of something, we have that in the discussion. That's different from the written report. So we might want to distinguish those 2 things.
Yeah, and I think last year you were able to distinguish those things, which I thought was helpful.
There were, I don't have the written reports with me, but I recall there were a few occasions where I did say a member, and sometimes I would say, clear consensus of this, and sometimes I would say a few members felt X. So I will try to use my words carefully to be clear, when it's majority, when it's a few but not majority, and in the rare occasions when it's only 1 or 2 that are still worthy of notation.
Yeah. And I think you do that really well. So I don't really want to change that process. Vice Mayor?
Yeah, it does occur to me that you could encounter an instance where, say, a couple council members have a similar concern that upon becoming aware of additional information ceases to be a concern. And so I think that, allowing for that in the final draft or something, or, I mean, it should be there long enough to raise it and get information, but it might be, it might be during the interview, it might be just council to council member, because, you know, when we have the closed session, so those don't need necessarily to linger, I think, in someone's report. And I think I think that is what you do, but I just wanted to.
Yeah, and again, that
mention
first closed session can be helpful for that, saying, you know what, I'm the one that said that or felt that, but I've since learned such and such, or it's not that big a deal. What was a big deal 4 months ago is not such a big deal. And, the other reminder I want to give you all is that the goal of this report, A, is to be consensus, but B, to, look at the big picture and the totality of the year and not just what happened last week or that one thing that really annoyed me kind of thing, which
Right.
we all do.
And I just think that if something like that is resolved, it can be withdrawn from the written record as well.
Well, did you figure out a consensus on that? Okay, great.
There's one other thing that I didn't put in the draft agenda, that just to get clarity from you. Last year, at the committee's request, we provided some additional information to the council with the self-evaluations. I think it was the citizen survey, the goals, and then the council values or the city's values. Just want to clarify that you'd want those additional materials shared again this year. You have 2 new members this year, obviously. That's the other thing. I will think about and maybe do some additional outreach to the 2 new members at the beginning or before the process, just so they're comfortable and acclimated to what's coming.
Yeah, that'd be helpful. Okay, should we move to the guiding questions for CAO evaluations?
Again, you'll see with, hopefully you have a colored version with red is anything new, and strike out for things that I'm suggesting changing from last year.
Is it to be clear that city auditor draft 2025 evaluation?
No, the beginning of the packet, there's it's dated 4/11/25 questions to drive the Palo Alto evaluation process. These are the self-evaluation prompts for your CAOs. Should be the first page after the timeline in the
Yeah,
packet.
staff report, page 5, packet, page 9.
So you'll see that I'm suggesting deleting 2 of the questions and adding some new things to better align it with last year's process and the desire for KPIs.
All right. Any questions or comments on these?
Okay, so question D, which is how your direct reports are doing. I think that was one where, particularly where the city manager has a series of department heads and departments. I recollected that was something that there was a particular interest by the council in hearing that appraisal. So I didn't know why that one was proposed to be deleted.
Subjective process by your consultant. Yeah, just trying to streamline it. Also trying to ensure that you focus on kind of the big picture and tie it more to the council adopted goals, and both the organization-wide priorities and goals, as well as the specific things that you asked of each of your appointees in last year's evaluation. Remember, there are very specific goals that you discussed and they agreed to. And so, if they're doing that and they're doing the city goals, is that enough? I mean, if this is something you all want to have, obviously you can do it.
Yeah, my recollection was that there really was a particular interest in understanding what the city manager's appraisal was of that. And when you reference to the council goals, and that's one of the things that you noted on your cover page about better utilize the council's adopted priorities to guide the process and evaluation. I don't want to over focus on the council priorities because those are, 4 priorities that are very important and meaningful, but there's a lot in our organization, as our city manager will and the city attorney will point out, that is not encompassed by those annual specific goals, which are defined as for like a 3-year period or so that we have abnormal focus on them. And so I think that they're an important part, but I wouldn't want to define the review too extensively around them. They're very important. So that, I guess that would be one other point of feedback. And I'd still favor hearing, particularly from the city manager, appraisal of how department leadership is performing. And then on F, you change what we had, which was regional, state, or national issues and trends that the city should be paying attention to trends you see within your purview that the city needs to be thinking about. And I'm not sure what is meant by within your purview. That sounds like it might be more within your control. We certainly have an even greater attention this year to trying to have strategic appraisals of how changing conditions at the regional, state, or national level may affect our ability to function as a city. And so I want to make sure that it's not just what we control, but what affects us that would be included there.
Yeah, my intent was not to fundamentally change the intent of that question. It was more to be clear that, the city attorney is only dealing with the issues related to, her world, her responsibilities, same for the city manager, et cetera. So that was kind of the thought behind your purview, just to be more clear that it's their role, not everything that might be out there.
Okay, well, maybe there's a way to refine that to make sure that, and it's at the top of our city manager and city attorney's mind, that just trying to figure out how changes the national level affect the state and regional, and how they all trickle down to us. And it's an exceptionally big part of our consideration this year, more than normally. And then on H, Oh, no, I'm looking at G, at my own notes. I guess in the examples that you have of availability, responsiveness, communication, and there's kind of a category that I think is one that a number of council members have been interested in is open-mindedness to feedback. Yeah, I don't know how to articulate that better, but something that captures that. And then you added a J, which is that they would be proposing or asking for a compensation adjustment, and then we'd react to that. And that's, I think, a change from our past practice. Is that right? Or it's always there?
No, that is how, I don't know about in prior years, but last year we did ask them. It just wasn't part of the
I
formal
see.
process. We kind of
Okay,
off the books went to them, said, I mean, we do the salary survey.
yep,
We share that with them and then we say, okay, based on that and, you know, what do you think is appropriate? And then I
Okay.
attach that to what comes to you. So
Good
this was
enough.
just to formalize it.
okay, thanks.
Okay, well, thank you for this and going through and revising it. I think my two general comments before I get to specifics are, first, that I think it's super important that the questions to the CAOs and the question to council members are aligned so that we're kind of eliciting parallel feedback and don't end up with two bodies of information that don't meet. I mean, for your sake, honestly, make your job a little easier. And I can see an effort to do that, but I think really focusing on that would be helpful. And I also think that I appreciate our public commenter and my colleague, and I really do want to echo that the conversation we had last year about KPIs, whether or not it's formally called KPIs or not, I don't know. But I do think that some kind of somewhat more objective work plan, milestones, goals, KPIs, something that it doesn't have to be as detailed as we all know, what we all know as the placemat. But I think that just to make it a little more objective, both for the CAOs and for we, when we come back the next year, that I would love to see a little more about what are their thoughts on what should be the and it's different in each instance, right? So a city attorney wouldn't necessarily have milestones like a city manager would. So that's why I'm putting out a bunch of terms there. But unless there were certain hiring needs or something, I mean, there could be. But I just think looking ahead so that we have both an instinct as to what they're thinking about the coming year and what would most behoove their department, in service of us, so that then when we look back, they can say, I did this versus that. And I think it gets a little less squishy that way. That's a technical term, squishy. So that's kind of my general thought. When I look at the specifics and starting with the questions for the CAOs, even what is your overall assessment of the state of the Palo Alto organization? Feels like a city manager question, but I don't know if that the city attorney needs to answer that. The clerk is somewhere in between on that. So I'm curious what my colleagues think of that. But then in B, it kind of comes back to what I was saying a moment ago about the goals, KPIs, et cetera. I would like that to be phrased instead of what are your key achievements, what was your performance against goals and any key achievements? But it's really, how'd you do? Did you have struggles because we had a terrible budget year? We had COVID, but you still managed to keep it together. How did we do as compared to what we expected? And what were some key achievements there? Because I think sometimes just being able to do what you set out to do is a big deal because we have high expectations in this city. Our CAOs each have high expectations of themselves. And I think sort of noticing that is important. And actually, now that I look at F, that's the one that had the, what are the trends you see within your purview? I think that your purview, if that was sort of baked into that top one, the overall assessment, you know, of the state of the Palo Alto organization within your purview, maybe that would help narrow it into some appropriate way. But I do think that, I mean, I take your point about the regional, state, or national issues, but I do feel that there might be trends in the way, you know, the law is going at the different levels, that the way there are clerks' best practices, the way, you know, cities are handling things. So I still think it's okay to look broadly there. On the questions to us, I've sort of gone down the auditor one, so more so than the others. But so looking at the city auditor one, it starts with, are you satisfied with quality and timeliness? And I guess I'd prefer that says, how satisfied are you? That may seem like a small thing, but I think the question is, what is the degree? It shouldn't be sort of a binary, are you, aren't you, kind of, as if, you know, suggesting, I think it's more subjective, suggesting that we might not. It's like, to what degree? And then similarly, in item 4, what it says, how strong do you feel the city auditor's technical competencies are? I would prefer it says, how confident are you in the city auditor's technical competencies? Because that's really what it's about, is when the city manager or the city clerk or the city attorney, the city auditor comes to us, how confident are we in them? You know, and I think that's an important aspect of that, instead of just some sort of merit-based assessment of skill. Because I don't know that we're in a good position to assess how great of a clerk, attorney, or auditor someone is just on that. I think it's more about what's to bake in the relationship with us and how confident are we in those skills. And on 5, how well does the city auditor think strategically to identify and address key issues? I would insert to anticipate, identify, and address, and propagate that through everybody, because I think that's part of this. You know, we have a highly skilled staff. That's half the battle there, is to see things coming, look around corners as best we can. And if they do, I think we want to lift up and acknowledge that. So those are my principal comments. Thank you.
If you don't mind, I mean, I think on the first one, do agree with the vice mayor that as written, I think it seems like it makes the most sense for the city manager, but I think it would be helpful. But I like the question for all CAOs, as long as the expectation's kind of clear that we're expecting them to answer it from the lens of kind of their role. Like I'd be curious to hear what the city clerk believes of the state of the Palo Alto organization, really kind of as it relates to her specific role. I think the clerk's office gets this kind of interesting perspective of how the boards and commissions are working in a way that would be very different than the city attorney or the city manager. Of course, the city attorney is going to have a very different perspective. So I don't think the question needs to be changed, but maybe when you kind of preview these questions with the CAOs, that it's kind of just clarified that we're not looking for their own perspective of kind of a top down, but of the entire organization, but really kind of from their own particular lens. I agree that I like D, and it really kind of gives us, I think it's really kind of our only opportunity in particular with the city manager. This has also come up too with some other CAOs. It's nice for the council to actually have the opportunity to be able to discuss some of the department leads on this kind of more one-on-one private setting with the CAOs. I know we would still have that opportunity, but I feel like that is more challenging if it is not, if we don't kind of get it written out ahead of time for us to be able to have those conversations. I'm fine with the other changes. The only other one that I was kind of I'd be a little disappointed if we lost, because I thought there was value in it, was what do you need from the council in the next fiscal year and beyond? I found that really valuable, but not really for, I guess, for that moment of an evaluation of the CAO, but for me, when starting to think about the next year and our priorities and what we can all do to be able to support one another, kind of that recognition, if the CAOs succeed or fail, so do all of us. And so I always just kind of like that, to be able to get that candid feedback from the CAOs about what they really need, because otherwise we never really engage in that conversation with them. Those are my thoughts on that. And then on the council interview questions. Sorry, yes, please.
I mean, sorry to interrupt, but just maybe if we can button this up to make sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah.
It sounds like we want to keep D.
+1 to D.
Everybody wants to keep D. On F, maybe just kind of fine tune the wording there, or verbally clarify. Councilmember Burt had a comment on G about adding open-mindedness. I think that this one is intended to focus on what each CAO kind of thinks about the relationship with the other CAOs, right? So this is their self-evaluation of how do you characterize the effectiveness. Oh, I'm sorry, about how they, their relationship with you, essentially, between the electeds and them. So do you want open-mindedness? I mean, we can certainly add that in as a, for example.
Just to clarify, it does say appointed officials / elected.
Right, so it's them reflecting on their relationship with the electeds.
Got it.
Yeah. So we're good with open-mindedness?
I just don't really understand what that means in this context.
Kind of receptivity to input.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
Maybe that's a better way.
Yeah, like receptivity makes more sense to me.
Yeah, but remember, this is their evaluation of the relationship with you. So how are they, if I'm the city manager, how do I report on how receptive to comments?
Self-reflection. really on that?
But this isn't a self-reflection question. That's what I'm getting at here. It's asking them about the relationship with you. So I think on the questions of them, we have or could have one that gets at that self-reflection. I think there was something maybe.
Well, we're asking them to respond to these questions. And one of the questions would be basically, how receptive do they think they are?
How
That's
receptive they think.
Yeah.
Okay. To me, that's different than the relationship with the elected officials. But, okay.
I think both would be valuable.
Okay, so we're adding receptive to input or something, or. Okay, we're keeping J. Vice Mayor Pinker, you talked in your opening comments about the KPIs and having objective markers for them. Is that was the intent of H? Does that get at it for you? I mean, they're specifically going to report on how they did on each of the goals they articulated. City manager was the only one that formally had KPIs last year. The others did some work on it and had some drafts, but they're not kind of formally accountable to them this year, but they will be the next time. But does that get at what you were looking for?
Two things. I might suggest rephrasing that to be, what are your priority? I don't know why, like, suggested, obviously, if we have, different instructions, we could communicate those, but what are your priorities and goals for the coming year? I guess we don't, if we've got KPIs in there, because it may manifest in different ways in the four roles, because the four roles are somewhat different. But I think the idea is just have something more objective about performance. So I would just add in, what are your priorities and goals? And then, but I think we kind of skipped over, and maybe at this point, it's only appropriate for the city manager if he's the only one that had the KPIs. But back up in B, I was trying to get us to say, what was your performance against your goals, including key achievements? And I think that's, a more holistic, that elicits a more holistic answer than just, oh, I excelled here, I excelled there. I think just, grinding it out day to day in some, excellent way that we see is important.
Yeah, so B is expecting them to, report specifically on the identified goals from last year, and in the case of the city manager, the KPIs, and then as well as all the other magnitude of things that weren't called out on.
But it's asking, what are your key achievements relative to those, not performance overall, including key achievement, is it?
Well, in my mind, it is, but we can clarify the wording.
I think that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, the
I'd like
first
to-
phrase is, what are your key achievements in the last year?
Particularly as that's a subset of key achievements. So what I'm trying to say
Overall-
is, what is your performance against those goals, et cetera, including key achievements? I think that holistic kind of performance is what we're looking at. It's a little broader, it might elicit more things.
The others are fine with that. We can tweak the wording.
Thank you.
H is similar to B, but for the coming year.
Right, H is looking forward, and I use the word suggested because ultimately you all will decide what their goals are, but we want them to say what they think they should be, as well as for the things they think should be the goals, how would they measure them? And again, that may get tweaked based on your feedback. And you'll have their ideas before you talk to me, so that you can then say, no, I want them to focus more over here, or yeah, those are great, or whatever. Okay, and do we want to keep I don't know if there was, I know the chair mentioned that. I didn't hear from the others, but is there any reason not to keep I? Good, okay. All right, great, thanks. Now we
Okay, so now then moving on to the questions actually being asked of council members when you have your one-on-one with us.
Correct. And since the vice mayor gave some comments on the auditor, maybe if we kind of round that one out and then we can go back from there.
Sorry to jump the gun.
That's good.
No? Did you have any more on that one? No? Councilmember Byrd on the city auditor? Yeah, and mine, which is actually no changes, but maybe just kind of a heads up for you, Dan, who's going to be doing these. I think the city auditor one's just going to be a little more challenging for you, because I think unlike the other CAOs, unless you're on, at least this has been my experience, unless you're on PNS, you really don't work with the city auditor as, like, you don't see the audits as closely, you don't work with them as much. And so I think how much detail you get will likely change as well from council members who are currently on PNS or who've never served on PNS, especially maybe with some of our new members. So just a heads up that I think that'll be a different experience for you. But otherwise, I think the questions are spot on.
Just to clarify, you're both okay with the suggestions Vice Mayor Vinker made?
Yeah.
So they make sense to me?
Makes sense to me.
Great. And just a heads up, because we're doing 4 appointees this year instead of 3, we'll probably need to have a little longer interviews or maybe break it up into 2 sessions, which okay, so maybe just going back in the packet to the clerk.
Oh, sorry, did you say city manager? Oh, clerk.
I was just going backwards. We can do it any order you
Yeah,
want.
Let's move on to clerk next. Any thoughts?
And I don't know if obviously the clerk is here. I think the city manager is listening in. I don't know about the city attorney, but you may want to, oh, hello, Molly. You may want to ask them, for their thoughts on these as well to make sure everyone's on the same page.
And Madam Clerk, if you have any thoughts on these questions that will be asked of you?
I know last year was my first evaluation, and I think the questions were helpful in guiding my overall what I submitted for my evaluation. I definitely, at least for myself, took the opportunity to really express in my written evaluation, highlighting the accomplishments of myself and the department. So I don't know, I on top of these questions, I like to add in a little bit more so I can give the council a real idea, a little bit more so on a day-to-day, what the accomplishments are, the goals we've met for the year, as opposed to just specifically answering these questions for myself. So I think giving a little bit more, I don't know, leeway in that, it would be helpful. But I think these questions definitely do provide good context overall.
I just have a couple of questions at the top here. I don't understand question 1. What do you see as the top 2 to 3 strengths of the city? Because isn't everybody answering question A, which is your overall assessment of the state of the Palo Alto organization?
Yeah, I think the strikeout just went 1 extra word there. It should be the strengths of the city clerk.
Okay, so then my comments would carry through, like what is the overall performance, including, if you want to say strengths here, whereas I think before it was key achievements. But although, again, wasn't that B? It just feels a little redundant because that A through K is for everybody, right? And then these are for the individuals. So if we're asking A, what's your overall assessment of the Palo Alto organization? B, whatever the language was, how was your performance against goals, including key achievements? I'm not sure how 1 and 2 here are different than A and B.
So the document with the A and B, those are the prompts that.
Sorry, yes, I'm confused. Got it. No, this is
So
for us.
that's what they're going to
Okay.
be telling you, and the numbered
Yes.
ones are what you're telling me.
Sorry, I lost it for a minute. You're absolutely right. So then I guess it would be more what I was saying before about the phrasing. I think that, again, for an office like the clerk, that I don't want the clerk to feel like she has to do cartwheels every so often so she can have, top things. I think that I think that, somehow in between these, 2 is a little more, how did the city clerk do on achieving council's priority goals? I don't know if it's her job to achieve our goals, but her stated priorities, is good. So maybe that's the broad one I'm looking for. How did the city clerk do on achieving council, on achieving her stated priorities? And then but I would put that first, and maybe I'm getting too in the weeds here, but it feels like first you want to know how holistically do we feel? And then second, are there a couple of top strengths that we really noticed and admire?
And then
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt, Dan. It looks like Ed Strahota, city manager, is online with his hand up.
Would you like to go to the city manager?
Do you want to just comment on that one, or?
Yeah, if you can respond, and then we can go to the city manager.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Sort of six, one, half dozen the other. In my mind, the first one was kind of the opening, what do you think is great about this person? And then diving a little bit more detail, say, okay, on the specific, and I think you're right, the council priority goals, I would add in as related to your position, because obviously it's not the totality of them. And then your specific priorities that were in your evaluation last year. But we can do it in either order. That was just the way my mind worked. The first one is kind of more broad-based. There may be one or two things that weren't a goal, but that just, they did a phenomenal job on that you want to make sure gets highlighted.
Yeah, please.
City manager, do you have any comments on this?
Sure. I just wanted to make sure I interpreted correctly. I thought I heard an invitation for feedback on, feedback on how I would interpret the questions that are being asked and any comments I might have. If that's accurate, happy to provide that.
Thank you. Yeah, we're working our way through, so glad you're on there. So we're on the clerk, but we'll come to you next.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
And you could also ask the appointees if they had any feedback on the prompts that will be in their self-evaluation in case they don't like those prompts or suggest some other ones. Back to the clerk. On question 2, I can be more clear to say priority goals is related to your position as well as, your specific priorities for the year. Whether you want to swap the order of those,
Yeah, it's not a big deal. I just want to make sure that there's a way to, again, with each one sort of get the holistic, and not just feel like it has to be highlights. So however you do that. But I do have a question because I think it's in each of these where it starts out, oftentimes you'll ask about strengths and you ask about areas for development. That's great. We should do that. But that question in this instance 4 starts with, does the city clerk have blind spots, in all caps? Like we're really expecting people to have a problem. And it's a little weird. And so I'm not sure why we say it that way I guess this is to us, so it won't, but it's it's like leading the witness, I guess, to suggest first that there are blind spots, so you feel like, oh, I got to think of, is there one? Whereas I think asking for each of them, are there areas for development that should be addressed, including, again, you could say including any blind spots as if it's a possibility, but you sort of feel like you should come up with one. And I don't know that that's fair to them to be, trying hard to come up with a blind spot in all caps there. But maybe I'm missing something.
honestly, I don't recall why last year that was put in all caps. This has not changed from last year. But the idea is, are there areas that they should?
They miss, sure, we all do, but I
think there is, I'm sorry to interrupt. I think there is a subtle distinction between a blind spot and an area of development. There's overlap, of course, and I'm not saying you need to ask both, but I think there is a distinction.
Well, I think that a blind spot would be an area for development. So I think that's the overarching thing. What all do you need to do to improve your performance, including, do you have blind spots? If we feel like we need to call them out, I'm indifferent to calling them out, honestly, because if someone has one and it's enough of a problem, I would hope it would come up without being prompted. Because if we're going to start listing things, there's a whole long list we could put in there. And it feels like almost unduly maligning our CAOs to have the long list. But I just think the main thing should be, what are areas for development?
Do a time check. We got no more than 10 minutes. So maybe if we can wrap this up with really just kind of high level feedback and just kind of approval of these would be helpful moving forward. So
Sure, if I may,
I'm-
we do need a few minutes in between to just swap out for the council meeting. So if we could have a hard stop at,
25,
yes,
Okay.
please.
we can do it. All right. So nothing else on city clerk? All right. And I had no other issue. I mean, I agreed with the comments made. All right, let's move to city manager. Yeah, so city manager on there, do you have any feedback before we jump into it?
Sure, only that a couple of things. One, to check in on process. My general take is council's free to ask me any questions you'd like to, and so I have no issues with the questions. Related to that, on the process front, I would assume that the committee's conclusions here today will be forwarded to the full council for approval, presumably on consent, assuming you're all in agreement. And that way, the full council is bought into the prompts that each of us will be asked to respond to, and has agreed to that. And then the one substantive issue I would just flag, and I know we talked about this some, is on the KPIs. I will want to ensure that we have consistency between the overall organizational KPIs that departments are working toward, and I'm holding them accountable to, with the KPIs that are identified through this process. So I would imagine that, with rare exception, all the KPIs we're talking about will be publicly disclosed and in the public record for all to be aware of, because we don't want, for example, any department, whether it's public works, I've just picked that, to be operating on one set of KPIs based upon my personnel evaluation, and another set of KPIs based on citywide budget and council priorities. So just wanted to share that perspective and expectation as we go into this.
Thank you. And I think that's fair and makes sense. Okay, any thoughts on the city manager questions?
If I could for a second, I know we're running out of time, but the city manager's comment about the process going to the full city council, that's not what we did last year. I believe the chair of the committee gave a verbal update at the committee, at the full council meeting about the process. So that's how we did it last year. We can do it however you want this year.
Yeah, I mean, I have no strong preference either way, Sandra.
Yeah, oh, go ahead. Sorry, Sandra.
Oh, I was going to suggest that when we could, clean up per your suggestions and take the revisions as well as the timeline, all the questions you've reviewed to council on consent.
I was trying to recall any process where this format went to the council and as an action. I don't recall that happening in the past. It's kind of a detailed.
It was a consent item last year.
Was it?
Yes.
Okay.
Let's just keep that process the same then.
So the questions and everything were on consent last year.
Yes, I wrote a supplemental report where we attached the questions.
Okay. All right. And then just a couple things on the city manager interview questions under 6. It says any vulnerabilities, I would add, and challenges. And then under 8, it gives some examples of different areas, leading others, et cetera. I would add vision and leveraging community assets. And then lastly, on the KPIs, and I didn't go back and review the KPIs from last year, but I think we did have a discussion that there is a certain alignment with the 68 different KPIs, but how we frame KPIs for a given CAO and the city manager isn't the same as the list of KPIs for the organization. There's an alignment with that, but I don't think they're one and the same. And I think we went through that discussion last year, and I'd have to refresh myself on comparing the two, but I don't think they're one and the same.
Yeah, I would have to go back and look. My recollection was, and city manager probably knows better because he's got them in front of him. The KPIs were tied to the specific council goals. And I think they were worded in a way that, you know, as you say, were in alignment with the council, but not necessarily a one-for-one.
And Vice Mayor.
I don't have anything on the city manager. Do you have anything on the city manager? I was going to
Nope, I'm
Okay.
fine with city manager.
Just a couple quick things on our city attorney. One is, and this is minor, and I know we're not supposed to be wordsmithing, but I think it's kind of important. Are you satisfied with the verbal and written analysis provided by the city attorney regarding, and then it lists a few things, which are only a few things of what all is done by that office. And so I would want it to say, are you satisfied with the verbal and written analysis and advice provided by the city attorney? And either a period or a comma including those things, because an awful lot is done by them. And I think it's all important, and we don't need to just zero in on these things. But the bigger question is item 8. I'm not sure why we have that, and I'm curious what the city attorney thinks of it, because it's, does the organization face legal vulnerabilities that you can see? That's kind of a question for her, not for us, I think. And I'm not sure you want us opining in perhaps non-privileged, conversations about that. So I question that question altogether.
So the closed session is privileged.
Yeah, I mean, again, this was
necessarily.
one that we used last year. Might be good for the attorney to weigh in on that.
So I think in a performance context, the question is whether any legal vulnerabilities are being spotted and brought forward in a productive way for council. So maybe I can work with the consultant to refine that question.
That would be great. Thank you. That's all I had.
Great. I don't have any other issues with it. Councilmember Burt?
The only other thing I would have is, I think, what was item 6 under the city manager, we may want to add to the city attorney, which is, does the organization face any vulnerabilities and challenges that you can see?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what 8 was trying to get at.
Oh, I see. I missed that. So then I would just add the word "and challenges."
Mr. Chair, just very briefly.
Yes, please.
So on KPIs for the city attorney, that's a challenging thing to set up those KPIs. Very happy to have the conversation. Probably depending on what they might be, they will need to be confidential for my position, and they may be more limited. There may be goals for the city attorney that don't have a corresponding KPI. So just want to plant that seed. We'll do our best and work our way forward. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Okay, there's no formal motion or anything you need from us, just that feedback? All right, and anything else? I know we're 2 minutes over the time we promised we'd stop.
Would the chair want to make a recommendation to take this forward to council?
Yeah, we'll put it on the consent.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, everybody, we're adjourned.